Well, Constantine Machorda, Fáilte Robisteach Gidí Q&A bio na Misa so bite-sized lumps of Ben. You're very welcome, friends, to this month's live Q&A on Bite Size with me, Ben. And this month with special guest author and academic Garry Bannister, Dr. Garry Bannister, to give him his full title. Tá Fáilte Roth, Garry, Constantine.
Good morning, Margaret. Tá son of a hanshaw in you. Tá go me me up to the kitchen or ragot to this.
Come to Meg. So yeah, Garry is saying he's hoping he'll be able to answer the questions that he's getting in tonight. And yeah, I'd say he will, but some of the ones that have come in already, I wouldn't be confident about answering myself. So not much of a man for comparative linguistics and Russian, but sure there'll be no problem to Garry. So just to introduce Garry, Garry's doing a bit of promo these days for recently published 4th edition of the Irish-English Thesaurus that's been published by New Island Publishing. So Garry came in and did a podcast with us recently, which was very interesting. And that podcast gives a lot of his background and how he got into Irish and what his background with the language is, with writing. And we thought it would be interesting just to get him in to answer some of our learners' questions as well, in a more targeted sort of way. But just to give you the background again on Garry, I think Garry is Fartus a Schligach, so Garry's from Sligo originally, and he studied Irish at Trinity College Dublin, Irish and Russian, and then on a scholarship to Moscow in 1977, the year I was born myself, he received a degree in Russian language and literature and also completed a PhD in comparative linguistics. So just before we go any further, Garry, what is comparative linguistics?
Well, it's really as is expressed by the word comparative. It compares languages. There's historical linguistics, which tries to understand the origin of language and the various different mutations that happen to languages and dialects to turn them into different languages and different dialects. That would be a diachronic sort of historical approach. And mine would be a more synchronic. I'd be sort of looking at the language, how languages work, the actual mechanisms within language itself that make them what they are. That's it in simple terms.
Very good. And presumably you're doing it in the context of a limited amount of languages.
Oh, yes. I will only be dealing with, well, all the languages that come from, say, a Proto-Indo-European, from that branch. I mean, it would be impossible to, there's so many different branches of languages around the world, you know, that it would be impossible for, you know, any one individual to be able to deal with them all. But within that branch, I was dealing specifically with the Slavic languages and with the Celtic languages, Irish in particular.
Very good. So while you were there as well, you were instrumental in setting up the first Department of Modern Irish at Moscow State University in the early 80s. And an interesting story that we heard was about how you put together this, was it Irish-English? Or sorry, Irish-Russian dictionary.
Yes. Well, that's really interesting. It was gone. I did put a dictionary together. Unfortunately, it disappeared in one morning. It was put into the shops in several of the bookshops in central Moscow, and they were put in the morning. And by the afternoon, all the books had been sold, because Russians have an amazing appetite for any kind of book, especially books that they would consider to be rare. So it was sold out almost, and I had some copies myself, which I foolishly lent to friends, reliable friends, and they disappeared. So I only now have the manuscript form now, which I'm trying to put back together into its original type set form. And I'm hoping that's going to come out next year. I'm going to make a few copies of that. So it'll be a copy of the original that came out, well, in 1983. So that's how long ago it came out, and was gone in a couple of hours. It's incredible, isn't it?
It is. And are there any libraries in Russia where you might come across?
Well, I tried to get copies. I've through my friends. I have a lot of contacts in Russia, and nobody was able to get a copy for me. I have tried. I did know one person I gave a copy, and they can't find the copy I gave them. They feel that they lent it to somebody else or something like that, or I don't know. I haven't been able to lay my hands on even one copy. So this is my. I hope to get this done anyway. That at least I'll have a copy of the original out available for people to, and I shall keep a copy for myself this time. I shall not give them all away.
Very good. Now, it doesn't really stop there. You did a fair bit of interesting stuff since you came back as well. Of course, you were teaching. You were head of the Irish department at St. Columba's College in Dublin. That's a boarding school in Dublin, is it?
It is, yeah. It's an international boarding school now. Yeah. It's got people from all over the world there. Okay,
so presumably
they're from
that. So, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, there are people from people there from Africa. There'll be people there from Russia, from the Ukraine, from all around the world. It's a hugely diverse educational establishment now. Than when I came there at first, it would have been very few foreigners there, but now it's very pluralistic in its intake of pupils, and it's a terrific place to have worked. I have to say the conditions there were absolutely incredible for the pupils. Every pupil had their own tutor who looked after them, so they didn't have failure there. You know, children who came with big difficulties, maybe in learning difficulties, were helped and able to overcome these. It's amazing what you can do if you've got money, Ben. It's an incredible thing.
It is indeed. Indeed. So sounds like a little bit ahead of its time there, but the money was there to provide those services.
Yeah.
And again, if we get around to it later, once we've answered listeners' questions, I would be interested in your perspective on the teaching of Irish across the generations, say your own. We're probably talking about 3 generations now since you were in school yourself. Just your perspective on that. And also, of course, so you worked on translations of Irish literary classics as well, such as in Talánach with David Sobey and Craine Kill with Alan Titley. So was this in the context of a sort of an advisor on matters linguistic?
Well, no, I did a bit of translation too, but for I was really just working as an advisor with Alan Titley. You know, he was asking me about particular things, and I was able to throw in my tuppence halfpenny. And I think he found some of the things I had to suggest. I think he found them useful. So I have worked with people on translations, and it's not a thing that I really do a lot of work in. I much prefer to do my own creative work. It's very, very stressful working as an interpreter or as a translator, because there's all sorts of factors involved here. You've got to be very accurate, and at the same time, you've got to be creative, and you have to be true to the text. So it's not an easy job. My wife was an interpreter and a translator for many years, and she had to give it up in the end. It was just so stressful. People think interpreting is easy. It certainly isn't. It's a very difficult job to do.
Okay, of course, we have this one as well. This is one of yours. This I bought in a bookshop in Ennis.
Yeah, that's an old one.
Labharfad. And Garry, I'm living in Portugal. I've been here for a couple of years. And
oh, are you? I didn't know that. I thought you were somewhere in Dublin.
No. It's a big job.
I should recognise that with the tiles behind you. The tiles behind you gives us away.
That's it, indeed. So it's a big job to bring all your books and all your records and all your Lego and the children to Portugal. But a little book like this, you put it in your pocket. You can bring the wisdom of your ancestors with you. So that's a good one. That's a classic. Now, I noticed this one is Proverbs in Gaelic. Is it still in Gaelic? Or is it now proverbs?
No, well, that was because it was going to the United States. We're going to it depends where they call it Gaelic, but actually Irish, of course, is what we should be calling it. That little book, Proverbs, which is out of print now, you can't get it, is good, I feel, in the sense that you've got at the back of the book, you've an index and you're able to find all the proverbs that you want, which is a handy thing. There are very few books and proverbs that have an index like that. So I found it one of the more successful publications I did.
And that's an approach, and that's an approach that you've carried through to the thesaurus in this edition, I understand.
Well, the thesaurus is a whole different ball game altogether. You know, that's 40 years work. It's a different thing. It's taken from all the various different writers over, well, from I would say from the late 18th century onwards. Any literature that was written, I was gathering in the vocabulary and trying to sort it out and get it into. It was an extremely difficult thing because certain words remained. You could see they were echoed in other words later on used by writers at a later stage, and beautiful words. Some beautiful words disappeared altogether. There was a lovely word, fafall, F-A-F-A-L-L, which was used way back at the beginning of the century, which means when the rain starts to fall away, die away. And that's not used anymore. But I thought, what a pity. I'd love to have included that word, but I couldn't. Yeah. There's lots of words like that that just, well, they died or they were no longer used by speakers.
Maybe
but that's it. So that's a different business altogether. Putting a thesaurus together, and it was the first one. So really I had nothing to, I had no blueprint, if you like, to work on. It was, and I had to cut out a lot of words that weren't there and put in words that were needed and have it practical and useful. It was a difficult job.
Maybe you should put together a little edition of words that didn't make it as well, like fafall.
Well, there was about 3 times, I would say, the amount of words that is actually in the final version. We had to cut out that many, you know.
Okay.
Because when you put in the English, it makes it even larger. And I didn't want to go with the option of just giving the Irish words. I felt it was very important that there's so many English speakers trying to learn Irish, that their modus operandi is going to be working through English towards Irish. So I felt they needed the English reference words there. So I wasn't going to make that sacrifice.
Very good. So just before we let go of this word fafall, because I like it because it's very onomatopoeic, really. It's kind of...
Yes.
Is that specific to a particular region, or can you remember where that came from?
Oh, no. I mean, that's used in all the dialects, fafall, the word fafall. Yeah. And certain times you find, for example, that, well, you know, if you might in a different register use the word breacher. Like, for example, if you're in talking about the word of God, you would say breacher day.
I'm not talking about fafall there, Gary. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, sorry. What are you talking about?
This word for the rain, fafall.
Oh, fafall. Oh, fafall. Yes. Actually, I can't remember now where I saw it, but it was a word that was used and quite widespread. Well, I saw it in a number of places being used. Fafall. Yeah, fafall. It's beautiful, isn't it? It's a lovely word. It even sounds, it's onomatopoeic, isn't it? You can sort of get the sense of it. Yeah, it's beautiful.
The rain falling on the leaves there as well. That sound.
Irish has loads of words, I thought, that are so, like, you know, smigerini and rulia bulia, all the words like that have so much character and color to them. It's a beautiful language for poets and writers because it's so rich with sounds and vibrations and tones. It's a gift to any poet or writer, I think.
Lovely stuff. So, Gurmahagat, I'm just going to start with the questions come in from one of our bite-sized members, Janine, because this is kind of getting back to the start of it all.
Right.
So I'll just put this up on the board here. So, Janine says, as a scholar of Russian myself since 1978 and a beginning learner of Irish, I know why I chose these 2 languages. I'm curious as to why you did, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts, Gary.
Well, there are two reasons, actually. I very much liked Russian literature, I have to say. I fell in love with Dostoevsky. I loved his novel Crime and Punishment and The Idiot and The Brothers Karamazov. To this day, The Brothers Karamazov is still my favorite novel in Russian. It's a wonderful insight into the psychology and the of the human being and the way they understand the world. And it asks the most basic and fundamental questions: what is good and what is evil? It asks questions: why do innocent people suffer? And if God is all good, how is it there's so much suffering in the world? These very universal questions that have been asked, you know, by philosophers since the beginning of time. And so this literature, and Russian literature is full of these kind of writers, but this literature really enchanted me as a teenager. And then, but I never thought at that moment that I was going to start studying Russian. I was always very much in love with the Irish language. That was my first love. But I was working in the photocopying center. In those days, we worked photocopying centers next to Trinity College, and the lecturers and the students would come down and have their work photocopied. And one lecturer came down. His name was Jan Vincent Chak. He came down and he wanted some work done very quickly. It had to be done yesterday, sort of thing. So I stayed on late and I did it all for him. And he said, that's great. And he was a fluent Russian speaker. He was Polish himself, but he spoke Russian fluently. And the next day he came in with Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment in Russian and a dictionary. He said, now read that. I opened the book and it was like, you know, looking at a blank wall. And he said, no, it's possible to learn Russian. It's possible. And I, being foolish, believed him. And so I decided I would do both Russian and Irish when I went to university. As I said in my last, when I was talking to Finine, I said there were 30 of us starting the Russian course, 30. And by the time we finished, with just 2 of us left. Wow. Everybody else had disappeared. But that was why I got into Russian. But it's a very difficult language, you know, especially in those days. This is during the Cold War, you know, there was no contact. We weren't even able to go to Russia. The best I could do was go to Poland to a Russian course there. But I'm very glad I did. I mean, and I persevered. It's an incredibly beautiful language. And I mean, you can only really understand writers like Pushkin by reading them in Russian. It's an incredible. Bulgakov's Master and Margarita is another amazing masterpiece. That's just pure poetry to read. So I'm delighted that I did it. So that's the reason I chose Russian. I was sort of kind of tricked into it. A fast one was pulled on me, you know.
Very good. So I hope that makes sense to you there, Janine. A window into the culture, particularly, and the literature of Russia. I'd be interested to know
why she got interested in it. That'd be interesting if she writes back and says what enticed her into doing Russian. I'd be interested to hear that. It's always interesting to hear what brings people to certain subjects in their life. It'd be fascinating. So if she writes into you, you can pass it on to me.
Yeah, well, if you're listening there, Janine, drop us a line there. We'll keep
Please do, Janine.
Going. Lovely stuff. So there's an interesting one again. This is more of a nerdy one now in terms of Russian linguistics from Michael Tom West. I'll just put the bones of this up on the screen. It's actually quite a long message, which I'll read. So Michael Tom West says, with me suddenly internet encountering you just now, I can only off the cuff think of one Irish word which has helped me to learn Russian. And even that is the Q form of its P form Welsh pair, cairn, Q-U-A-I-R-N, phono spelling, sorry. So pen equals mountaintop, vadi mekum for roo, and then there's something pen in Russian there, tree stump. I hope this makes sense to you, Gary. Visualize it as a South African kopje, flat top type of mountain for a connection. But I know there are many more. In fact, a fellow student of Russian in the 70s who was Irish told me of them, and they helped me assimilate Russian, although I don't know if I'm half Celt or a quarter Celt. My grandmother was Welsh and spoke. My grandfather was surnamed White, but who knows if he was Irish. So I love to see that Irish-Russian, I'd love to see that Irish-Russian dictionary that you mentioned in your comment. And Michael Tom's challenge to you there is, please give me more Irish vaid-makums, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Garry, to maintaining my on the whole fluent Russian.
Okay, well, congratulations. He's found a new way of learning a language by association. Certainly, when I get this new dictionary out, hopefully, maybe at the end, I'm very busy at the moment, but I'm working on it in all the spare time I have, trying to, you know, get this manuscript back together again. And I'm typesetting it myself, which is a very slow job, as I'm certainly no expert at that. So that's what I'm working at when I have spare time. But as soon as I do, I'll send a copy. I promise I'll send a copy to you, Ben, and you can send it on. You can send it on to this very enthusiastic Russian speaker. He'd probably find that the Russian is only for beginners. It's not. It was never designed for sort of advanced learners. It was just to get people started, and there was nothing available in those days other than books in English. As regards the languages being similar, I can't see how that's possible, because the Slavic group of languages is a different branch of Proto-Indo-European than the Celtic. There is no connecting branch between the Proto-Indo-European and the languages Russian and Irish. However, that said, it is possible that there are words, for example, that loan words that came from Latin or from English or from Greek, even, especially for Russian. For example, in Irish you have the word kultur, and in Russian you've got kultura. And they both obviously come from Russian. You have star in Irish, meaning history, and historia you have in historia you have in Russian, and they both, of course, come from the Latin. Then you've words like museum in Irish and musée in Russian, and they come, of course, from the Greek word musei. So those sort of things happen. And then again, as I think I was saying to you just before the program started, Ben, I was saying that there's a lot of words now coming into Russian from English due to the internet and due to, well, after perestroika, when a lot of American corporations went into Russia and set up their businesses there. And so you get a lot of words. I wrote down a few words here, like freak is in Russian now. Somebody's a freak. Kesh, meaning cash, and shopping. They don't say, they don't use the Russian word there. And also one which is quite obvious, selfie, to take a selfie. That's the same word in Russian. So there are these words that are coming in the 20th century, late 20th century, early 21st century, into Russian and into Irish. And so there would be similarities there, I would imagine.
I think, if my memory serves me, we've a few students who speak or have studied Russian or are Russian. I think somebody mentioned das and the whole notion of deshul and das having an equivalent in Russian that was similar, possibly coming from Greek and from something Proto-European that was a bit older.
Yes, of course, you've the Orthodox Church, you know, where they took an awful lot of from Greek. A lot of the Greek Orthodox and Russian Orthodox are very, very close, and they have liturgical terms which would be in the two languages. So, and they have, of course, by means of osmosis, they've moved into the spoken language. So, yes, you'd have that too, of course.
And Are there any sort of older sort of elements of culture or superstition that you would identify as having that common root as well, like sort of pishoga in Russian or Russia?
I came across some weird things. For example, I found a few proverbs that were in Russian that were also in Irish. I found, for example, some words that expressions. One weird one in Irish, you can say "Tá lapa gruigach ege sa kurt." Tá lapa gruigach ege. I don't think they say sa kurt. Sorry, I'm wrong there. Tá lapa gruigach ege. It means he has influence. He has a hairy paw. And that actually is used in Russian. That expression, same expression. Another one, which very common, well, was common in the Sligo area, I remember, ni sonus shanesh, ni banish boss. That's a lovely expression. Ni sonus shanesh, ni banish boss. Old age isn't happiness. Death isn't a marriage. A wedding festival, you know. Well, you have that also in Russian. And there's, let me see, there's some things like that, strange things which you'll find. But I'm just trying to think, is there any kind of pishrog that just things? But then again, you see here, Ben, you'd have the problem here that all of these would come from the same root. Mythologies go way back, and you're going to find the Cinderella in a lot of different, you know, cultures now. So you wouldn't, it may not be any sort of link with Irish or with the Celtic languages, not that they all inherited it maybe further back. You know, mythology is one of the furthest and deepest rooted parts of our mutual heritage. So it's hard really to talk about that.
Absolutely. So what we're talking about is establishing whether or not they exist in territories between here and Russia. They possibly do. I did a course with Pádraig Héalaí in university on Héalaí, and one of the things that he emphasized was how common these themes were across Europe, the themes that we encounter in Irish folklore, Héalaí.
Yeah, I showed this when I was on Finney's. There's a lovely book by Pádraig Héalaí, this one here, and here has Peig Sayers. It's a kind of an umbrella of all the folklore and stories that were in the Gaeltacht. There's two of these books. I've got a second one here. First and second copy. So if people are interested, as you say, in the Béilídeas, these are the kind of books they should look for it in. They'll find them there.
Absolutely. So we'll take one of the questions that came in last week. Here we are. So we've had Michael Tom. So this is from Fraser, and Fraser is Scottish.
Right.
So again, this is a relatively long one. Fraser says, I'm Scottish, but I'm learning Irish from my wife. Now that I know a little bit, I find it really interesting to hear the ways in which English is spoken by some Irish people and how it clearly follows Irish language rules. A couple of good examples of this are seen in the way that her mother and father, who don't actually speak any Irish, say the following. Number one, they say I do be, because of the case of the habitual tense in Gaeilge. And if they tasted something they don't like, and they want to comment on what they've just tasted, past tense, they will say, I wouldn't be a fan of that. So using the conditional. So Fraser says, I just read recently that the past tense and the conditional form of the copula are context dependent. So I'm guessing there's some scope for getting them mixed up or starting to use them interchangeably over time, or especially when translating into another language. So he says, it's really interesting to see traces of hundreds or thousands of years of Irish culture still there, a little like language fossils for historians. So Garry, Fraser is wondering if you have any comment on this, or if you can think of any other examples of this.
Yeah, the conditional, the dreaded conditional, as he says, is something which has very wide usage in modern Irish. It has generally got I'm just trying to be right here. It's 3, maybe 4 uses. The first one is when you want to say in Irish something in the habitual past. When I was in the Gaeltacht, I would go down to the shops, I would buy a newspaper, I would have a cup of coffee. That's instead of used to. It's also used, of course, when you want to be polite. Would you mind closing the door? An bhéad fan doras a gúna. It's also used, for example, if you're making a condition, you know, dá mé an talma agatsa, an mé fá ábalta caurulium. So if you had the time, if you were to have the time, would you be able to help me? So it has that use. So it has, as I say, it has several uses like that. So it's very widespread. As regards the second part of his question, well, yes, I think there's a lot of influence of Irish on English spoken in Ireland. I'm after making a mistake. That's a good one, you know. That's a very Irish thing. Or he's taken my hat on me. That's a loving shame my hat on him. Those kind of expressions are very widespread in popular language. God be with the days. These kind of expressions, they're very, very, very frequent in Irish. Even like, for example, that put the kibosh on that. That put the kibosh on. That's kipe bosh, the death cap. Put the death cap on it. So that comes also from Irish. There's absolutely umpteen of these. You could go on all night with how many. Since he's from Scotland, I have a very interesting one for him, which was told to me by Terence McCaughey, who was lecturing years ago in Trinity College on Gaelic, and I don't remember very much from those classes because there was only one part, very small part of the course I was doing. But he told a story about an expression in Gaelic, which is "tug me gefire do." Tug me gefire do. I gave gefire to him. And he explained where that came from, because he said in the years when the English were using the Scottish people as cannon fodder in their many wars abroad, they didn't speak English. They only spoke Gaelic. But they understood when they were in behind their cannons and they had their torches in their hand, they'd hear the English officers shouting, "Give fire! Give fire!" And so that went into Scottish Gaelic being "Tug me go fire though." I gave him a good belting. So that's an interesting one.
Yeah, it's a good one. Yeah. Oh yes. So just this, Gary, just a small little comment there from Brian Brew. What about older words in Russian with an Indo-European root, like moloko?
Moloko. Yeah, moloko. Yeah. Well, as I say, I don't want to speak about things that I don't know about. I am not a historical linguist. I really don't want to pontificate about things I don't know very much about. This could very well be true, but I wouldn't be the sort of person who'd be able to answer that question.
I don't see a relationship between that example and the Irish language itself.
Milk, banya in English. Yeah, banya. Yeah, banya just means the white stuff. Banya, that's what it means, the white stuff, milk. That's where it comes from. But I don't know.
Oh, yes. Well, Gurmahagat Avri and Peishkiel. We'll take a question here from Julia, Gary. Again,
okay.
Other long question. I'll just put up bits of it before I go. So, Julia says, I've studied French for some time and love how some things can be expressed in French which cannot be said in German. I take it Julia's German or English. And I'm curious how this is in terms of Irish. Could you point out a few such phrasings I'd love to learn? It shows how each language is a mirror of how people approach and view the world. For example, in French, you do not make an acquaintance. It is faire connaissance. And you have the word naissance there, which means birth. In other words, if you really get acquainted to somebody, it is the birth of something new. Very nice.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe people from France are not even aware of it when they say it. This is why I love to learn new languages, and I'm looking forward to discovering such details in the Irish language.
Yes. Well, there are certain words in Irish, as we all know, that you won't find in English. One of the ways you can find these is by looking at words that have different semantic ranges or limitations. If you take the word, for example, love, in Irish, it means both hand and arm. If you use the word bail, it means both lips and mouth, and so on. You find that there are lots of words like that in Irish you'd have one word, maybe in English you have two. In the word, for example, love, you've very few words in English, but in Irish you've an awful lot of words. You have cion, you've got surk, you've got dove, you've got gyaun, you've got graun, you know, when it's a poetic form of love, graun, and you've got dúil, which is a lovely word which you don't have in English, you know, tá dúil agam in milseán. And even O'Flaherty's very famous book is just entitled Dúil, and of course it's referring to the physical desires and the very earthy desires of human beings. So that you don't have in English. So as regards, say, expressions, one of the ones that first comes to mind would be Vefwigiasa. I think that, I don't think that's in English. Tommy Fwigiasa Eki means that I am under geish. In other words, I have to do what I'm being asked to do, or otherwise I'm being unchivalrous. I am obliged by being, for example, in the old Brehon laws, women had a lot more power than men in many areas. They could divorce their husbands if he wasn't fulfilling his conjugal rights. They could divorce their husbands if he insulted her in public, if he said something, you know, about her that was untoward. She could divorce him if he had sex with another man, or she could divorce him if he wasn't bringing enough food and good things into the house. She's very, very powerful. So she could put him fuigyasa to do things. And if he didn't do them, well, he was being unchivalrous, and therefore he would not be worthy of her. That sort of thing. Also, there are elements from like the banshee. That's a wonderful thing from the Pishog, isn't it? Which you have, and this wonderful stories. Marathon is another lovely one. A changeling. We don't really have that in English. Where it's a lovely in Sligo long ago. What they did I think this is in the west of Ireland. When they went out of the room, the parents would put tongs on the across the cleavon. What's that? Cleavon? The
crib,
where you put the baby. Sorry,
the crib.
Crib, yeah, you put a boat that cleavon, and this would prevent the fairies coming and taking the child and replacing with another child that looked like that child, but was a mulaton, was a changeling, and would cause awful trouble for the parents. So that's another thing. So when people were insulting a child, some say, "Oh, that's not a real child. That's a mulaton," you know, or this a useless creature. And another, they all keep coming when you start thinking. Another lovely one is Lanan She. That's a lovely one. A Lanan She means if you look at a young man and you see that he's very, very pale and wan, and he's not up for much, you know, he's sort of just loafing around, not able to do any work, without any energy. People say, "Tá Lanan She eg an varog shin." He has a fairy lover, and these were women that came in, fairy women who came in, and they would lie beside the man, and they would suck all his energy out, almost like a vampire. And if it didn't stop, they would eventually die. So Lanan She is another expression which is very typically Irish.
Mm-hmm.
And that's enough.
Yeah. For going back to the Indo-Europeans again, there's a Tachta Nera Dúig Urim.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah.
The tendency to build the houses facing southeast, I think, is it?
That's
so
right. Yes, 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 yes.
From, I don't know if it's that you're coming at somebody from the back of the house, or that you're approaching them with the sun behind you, so that they're obscured.
I heard many different reasons for this. One of the reasons, if someone come, you know, a Honishe near a Duiorum, it means that he came. When you're taking your sword out of your scabbard, right? You're taking it this way. So if he comes near a Dui, sorry, I can't see. If he comes near a Dui on him, and you're taking out, you have to take your sword out, and he can stab you before you've got your sword out of the scabbard. I don't know. Might be true. Sort of folklore more than science. But there are wonderful, wonderful stories like that in Irish. I don't know if your listeners have heard of the Hungry Sod. That's a lovely one. I remember an old man telling me this story about when he was going home on his bicycle, and he had a puncture and he had to get off, and he sat down on the sod, and he was overcome by a terrible, terrible hunger. He was absolutely weakened by this hunger, and he barely made it to the cottage where he said he needed to eat something. He just needed to eat something, or he felt he would drop dead. And the man in the house knew what had happened. So he came out with a tiny little pinch of bread, and he said, all you have to do is eat this. And when he ate it, the hunger left him. And this Fod an ocrais is where it is believed people of the famine died, and that hunger has been left in the soil. And that was very widely believed when I was younger. You know, people believed these things, and they said they experienced them even. So there's those sort of things. Wonderful tales.
Oh yes, Gurmagat. So as I say, folks, you're welcome to send us your questions. We're on Facebook and YouTube, so you can leave your questions in the comments bar for Garry here. And yeah, Gary's here. It's an open invitation to ask questions on proverbs, folklore, translation, teaching, comparative linguistics, or anything else Irish language related. And just while we get an opportunity, while we give people an opportunity to send in questions if they wish, I wanted to ask you about your perspective on the teaching of the Irish language in schools in Ireland now versus maybe, let's say, 50 years ago, and what's happened in between. Because as a teacher myself, one of the things that I hear most commonly is people say, I'd love to learn the Irish language, but the way that it was taught when I was in school was terrible. I grew up in the Gaeltacht myself, and I've never had first-hand experience or perspective on this, because the main language of the school was Gael and was Irish, and that's how you learned it. It wasn't really taught to us in a formal way. We didn't have grammar lessons. You just kind of absorbed it as it went along. So while I accept what they're saying, I've never had a perspective on it myself, a personal experience of it. So I suppose my question for you is, I think that there was a brutality in the way that many subjects were taught at one stage, and that doesn't have a whole lot to do with Irish. But in terms of the way that Irish was taught when you were a child, and then how it was being taught when you started to teach yourself in the secondary system, and how it's being taught now, can you see any interesting change or development, or how do you think it's being handled?
Well, the problem with teaching a language is, you know, if people are sitting in a desk, you know, just listening to somebody telling them how the language works, or using whatever methodology they can, when you're sitting down in your desk, you know, your brain is switched off anyway. 30% of your brain isn't working. And you may have grasped it in class if you've managed to stay awake. But at the end of the class, it's well gone, and you're out with your friends and you're enjoying yourselves, and Irish is the last thing on your mind. And then you come back the next day into the class and you've forgotten everything you did the week before, you know. So it really isn't a satisfactory way to teach any language, let alone Irish. So the way we have to go about it, I believe, and we are heading that way, is build more Gael Scolanna. And I think in the schools where we have subjects being taught through the medium of English. Certain subjects should be taught through Irish. Irish history, Irish geography, PE. There's lots of things which can be done through the medium of Irish. Break time, the canteen things can all be in Irish. You can call things. There's all sorts of ways to promote Irish in school by getting people to do activities through the medium of Irish, and that's the way you learn the language. Certainly not by reading, as beautiful as it is reading Peig Sayers or reading the poetry of O'Díreáin or Sean O'Riordan. Beautiful poetry, but that's not the way anybody's going to learn to speak a language. And we've really got to get to that stage. I think people are waking up to that. And we will get there eventually. I was talking to a chap today who was learning a language, and the teacher said to him, had a balloon in the class, and what he had to do is when he was learning the new words, he had to hit the balloon with his elbow like that into the air, and then go collect it and then hit it into the air again. And the reason for this, the teacher said, was to get him to do some activity while he was learning. So you must be doing activities to learn properly. When we watch our parents and we're learning a language, when we're asked, do we want something to eat? And we say, yes, we do want something to eat. There's an emotional tag there. We do go into the kitchen. We do open the fridge and we take the thing out. And fridge isn't just a word, an abstract sort of concept. We have to go to the fridge and open it. Mm-hmm. So that's the way forward for the Irish language. I think also we have to have work for people who speak the language. When I was younger, we could go into Fáilte, which is just off Henry Street there, and you could go in. There were lovely books there, and all the staff spoke Irish. In the embassies, the people spoke Irish. In the civil service, they spoke Irish. They don't speak Irish anymore. This is ridiculous, you know. It should be a part of the requirement to get certain jobs to be able to speak the language, and it should be, you know, financially rewarded, but it's not. We haven't got there yet.
Mm-hmm. And then, thank you, Garry. And then, looking at it from the position of a child who is not going to a Gael school, a child who's going to an ordinary school, has the teaching in those schools changed in any sort of significant way in the last 20 or 30 years, as far as you're aware?
Well, I can say that I've left. I'm retired now from teaching, mm-hmm. so I can't really speak. But I was very lucky to work with some very, very powerful young Irish teachers. There's a lady now who's taken over from me. Her name is Alison Maybury, and she's a magnificent. She gets wonderful results, and her class is just alive. You know, when you go into it, there's no sense that, you know, oh, it's another Irish class. She's all sorts of tricks up her sleeve. And there's another girl there, Lisa Lynch, and she's incredible too. I mean, the kids just love her, and she takes them off to these various different Irish things. She brought in Gashka, you know, that thing, and they love doing that. There's loads of things like that. Mm-hmm. Young teachers are doing now to try to vitalize the language, and it's an uphill battle. I have to say, it is very difficult for teachers because, you know, like if you're doing maths, you can say, or doing one of the sciences, they can say, well, you know, you can get a good job here, you can get a good job there, but really you don't have that in Irish. You really have got to, you know, enthuse the children, get them interested. And so it's much more difficult for an Irish teacher than, say, for somebody who would be teaching physics or teaching, I don't know, one of the more practical subjects. But that said, I am absolutely, when I used to go attend these conferences, I was absolutely blown away by the energy of the young teachers coming into Irish. They are incredibly, positive, determined, and with great agendas for motivating children. So I'm positive that we're going to get there eventually. It will take time, Ben, but we will get there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Lovely. Cormac, Garry, thank you for your insights and your knowledge and for sharing them with us.
Thank you for having me on.
You're very welcome. So more Irish subtitles for programs in the Irish language and not just English subtitles, says Brian Baru.
Absolutely.
And the ironic thing, again, with the rugby being on TG Cahir, the club's rugby being on TG Cahir, I know that you started learning Irish in order to escape rugby, but some people now... Some people now are learning Irish in order to understand rugby on TV.
Yeah, I certainly was a nerd. Yeah, that's a thing that is really, that's one of my pet what things that gets me going, is that on TG Cahir all the subtitles are in English. People want Irish. I said this years ago, and they were saying, oh, they're going to bring it in very shortly, and that was decades ago, and they still are putting in English when it should be Irish. Absolutely. People want to see Irish. Anyway, maybe you could get them to do something. Do you have any influence there in TG Cahir?
I don't. I think that Russa O'Snuddig from Keela has had a bit of a campaign going for years.
Oh, he's great.
Trying to get them to...
He's terrific. Russell's mom. Russell got a Gael Skull open, you know. He got his own Gael Skull. And he was working, I don't know how it's going. He's trying to open a university, an Irish language university. Did he tell you about that? He
didn't know, but he's in Sligo too, isn't he?
I don't know where he is now, but he's a terrific campaigner for the... And so was his dad. I think his dad's still alive. Pádraig O'Snuddig.
Pádraig, absolutely. Yeah.
He must be 100 now, is he?
I don't know, but...
He's a great carrier, great warrior.
He is. Patron of the poets.
Yes.
So anyway, we'll finish up. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to tell us where the thesaurus is to be had. I don't have a copy myself because, as I said, I'm in Portugal, but I'll certainly have a look at it when I get home for Christmas.
I'll just have a copy of it to show what it looks like. One moment.
Anybody watching, I'll be home for Christmas, and if they're wondering what I might like, then...
There it is. And the thesaurus. Right,
it might exceed my baggage.
There's one other thing just before you go. The New Ireland, for people who are interested in, easy books to read in Irish, in good literature, they've brought out a new series of books called Open Doors. I don't know if you've seen it. And they have, for example, here is Roddy Doyle's book. You can see it. There it is. And so that's the English version.
It's not for it. I can just about. I can't see which one it is.
It's called Not Just for Christmas. It's called in English.
Okay.
And then they brought out. New Ireland have brought out another, and this is now Níon on Il Héalaí, a beautiful translation. And there are a number of these books, Ben, for people who are interested. Loads of them, and they're very easy to read. And you've got the English if you get into any difficulty. So if people are looking for a Christmas present, or maybe a Halloween present, they could get maybe one of these.
Lovely. So the name of that series is?
It's called Open Doors. And they're all like this. If you haven't got the money, you can actually go to a library. I think they're in a lot of libraries, but they're really fun to read. Good literature and beautiful translations. New Ireland, that's right. New Ireland publishes them. They're very well worth reading those.
How many different books are in that
series? There's loads. I've just got a handful here. Look. Yeah. That's just a handful of them. There's loads of them. And they're continuing to bring them out. So they're especially if you're in a Gael Skull and you're looking for decent literature to read, those are well worth trying. The kids will love them. And also adults who are perhaps, intermediary sort of knowledge of Irish, they also would find them very interesting, I'd imagine.
Yeah, it's a perfect material for book clubs and learners groups and that sort of thing. Yeah,
absolutely.
Honey, yes. Gurmíle magat.
Gurmíle magat, sir. Agus
from the photo, we have a Fragger again o Janine on son Garry.
Oh,
she something similar. I was studying French and struggled with the gender of nouns. I heard that there are no definite articles in Russian. Also, it was exotic.
She's correct. She's absolutely correct. No definite articles. So that's one problem out of the way.
Gurmagat to Janine, and I'll be seeing Janine.
Gurmagat Janine. Gnari lat.
Orshin Ordor Garry. Gurmíle magat sa bhelin. Agus gnari lat.
Gur míle maith agus ha mála bhuíocht déad ben gur thug tú an seans seo domsa a bheith ar de chlár. Míle buíochas rís.
No haver. Tá go maith cháirde. Very good. I'll be back with you in a month's time with a different guest and a different theme. Gur maith go farfad is a bheith lom agus túr ar dí hain. Slán go bhfuil.
Slán go bhfuil. Slán.